He said it on a Tuesday afternoon in July, leaning against his patrol car parked at the creek turnout, watching her wring out a shirt with the kind of easy competence that made everything look simple. He hadn't planned it, hadn't rehearsed it. It came out the way true things sometimes do, before better judgment can get a hand on the brake. You know, Clara, whoever ends up marrying you is going to be a very lucky man. He expected a laugh, a modest deflection, the kind of thing that lets everyone move on without anybody having to be brave. Instead, she went still. Color came into her face slowly, like a lamp being turned up. She didn't look at him right away. Then she did, and her expression was something he'd never seen on her before, open and afraid and decided all at once. "I was hoping it would be you," she said very quietly. Sheriff Ethan Callaway was 32 years old, running the whole of Millhaven County out of a two-room sheriff's office on Main Street, with one deputy, a county-issue Ford Galaxy with a bad alternator, and a jurisdiction that stretched 40 miles in every direction to the base of the mountains. He'd taken the badge from the old sheriff, Pete Warren, 6 years back, when Pete's heart finally told him to sit down for good, and he'd worn it every day since with a kind of quiet seriousness that the county had come to trust without ever quite saying so out loud. Everyone called him Ethan. Only his mother had ever used his full name, James Ethan, and she'd been gone 6 years now, the same year he took the badge, which he didn't think was a coincidence exactly, but wasn't sure what else to call it either. He wasn't a complicated man. He worked long hours, kept his word, filled out his reports on time, and went to bed tired most nights with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd done what needed doing. What he didn't have, what he'd quietly stopped expecting, was somebody to come home to. His patrol route ran past the Harmon place most days, out on County Road 9. Daniel, his wife Ruth, and their daughter Clara. Good people, the kind who flagged him down with a thermos of coffee on cold mornings and never made a thing of it. Clara Harmon was 24. She kept books for half the small operations in the county, worked the family's dairy alongside her father, and still found time to drive soup out to old Mr. Briggs when his back went out. She did all of it without complaint and without fanfare, the way some people just breathe without thinking about it. Ethan had known her for years, waved at her from the cruiser 100 times, eaten at her family's table more Sundays than he could count, back when Pete Warren used to bring him along as a young deputy. He'd watched her work and thought, vaguely, that Daniel Harmon had raised a fine daughter. He had not, until that particular summer, understood what he was actually looking at. There'd been complaints about kids racing trucks along the creek turnout on County Road 9, tearing up the bank, so Ethan had taken to swinging his patrol car through there most afternoons, running radar, mostly for show. On a Tuesday in July, he pulled off to check the erosion the trucks had left behind when he found Clara down at the water, doing wash the old way. An odd habit for a girl with a perfectly good machine at home, but Clara swore the creek got things cleaner, and nobody had ever successfully argued her out of it. She didn't see the cruiser roll up at first. Set her basket at the water's edge, and started in with the easy efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair pinned loose with a few strands escaping at her neck, humming something low under her breath, a Loretta Lynn tune he half recognized off the radio, barely audible over the water. He got out, leaned against the fender, wasn't watching her exactly, except that he was. Not in any way that would have embarrassed either of them. Just the way your eyes go to movement, to life, when the rest of the landscape's holding still. After a while, she noticed him. "Morning, Sheriff." "Morning, Clara. You know it's just Ethan when I'm not writing you a ticket." "You never write me tickets." "Not yet," he said. She laughed at that, and it did something to the afternoon that the sunlight alone hadn't managed. They talked a few minutes about nothing particular, the county fair coming up, whether Briggs's back had gotten any better, the truck racing that had brought him out there in the first place. Then she went back to her wash, and he went back to leaning on his cruiser, writing up nothing much in his notebook, and the creek moved between them, and Ethan Callaway thought, for the first time in a long while, that patrol didn't feel much like work out here. The town of Millhaven held its summer social the last Saturday of July, out at the fairgrounds, a flatbed trailer for a stage, a local band doing a set heavy on Waylon and Merle covers, enough potato salad and barbecue to feed twice the county, string lights strung between two power poles once the sun went down. Ethan worked it, technically. County policy put a deputy or the sheriff himself at every large gathering, but Millhaven's idea of trouble at the summer social was usually somebody's teenager sneaking a beer behind the bleachers, and Ethan spent most of the night leaning against the fence in his off-duty jacket with the radio clipped low on his belt, more guest than officer. He showed up to find the Harmons already there. Daniel in his good Western shirt, Ruth with her hair done, and Clara in a pale blue sundress that was simple and clean and somehow exactly right. She was over by the dessert table, laughing at something, completely at ease. Three men asked her to dance before the band had played 20 minutes. Ethan watched from across the fairgrounds with an expression he'd have called neutral, on-duty, professional. Sandra Morrison, a widow a few years older who ran the diner and had a habit of saying exactly what she saw, sidled up next to him with a plate of cobbler. "You've been staring at Clara Harmon all night, Sheriff." "I've been watching the crowd. It's my job." "Ethan," she said patiently, "I've known you since you were 11. That's not your job face." He changed the subject, but driving the county line later that night, radio murmuring low, dust rising behind his taillights, he thought about it honestly. Clara Harmon, kind and capable and he pulled the cruiser onto the shoulder for a second just to sit with it, someone he wanted to see every single day. He hadn't known that until right now, but now that he knew it, it seemed obvious. The kind of thing that had been true a long while before, he'd had the sense to look at it straight on. He sat there a few minutes with the engine idling, watching the sky go dark over the hills, feeling like a man who'd just found something he hadn't known he'd lost. Old Mr. Briggs's back got worse in August, and Clara started driving food out to him every other day. Ethan found out because his patrol route ran right past the Briggs place, and he'd taken to timing his afternoon rounds so they crossed hers more than strictly necessary. One Tuesday, he pulled the cruiser up beside her Datsun in Briggs's gravel drive and got out. "You following me, Sheriff?" "County road," he said. "Free to use." She looked mildly amused, covered it fast, and let him carry the casserole dish in for her, which he suspected she didn't actually need help with. They sat with Briggs an hour while Clara heated soup and checked on his wood stove. Briggs was a man of strong opinions and limited tact, and he told Ethan, straight out, in front of Clara, that he was a fool if he didn't see what was standing right in front of him, badge or no badge. Clara went bright red and found something urgent to do in the kitchen. Ethan looked at the old man. "Working on it," he said quietly. Briggs made a sound that was probably approval. Driving back to town separately, county cars weren't for personal errands, a rule Ethan enforced on himself more strictly than the county required, he found himself, for the first time in 6 years of wearing the badge, wishing the shift would just go ahead and end. It was a Tuesday again. Ethan had started to think Tuesdays meant something when he swung the cruiser through the creek turnout on his afternoon round and heard her at the water, bigger load this time, and singing, not performing, just low and easy to herself, the way people do when they've forgotten anyone's listening. He cut the engine, sat there a beat longer than regulation required. Blue sky, cottonwoods, running water, Clara Harmon doing an ordinary thing with a grace she didn't seem to know she had. She noticed him, raised a hand. He got out, walked down to the fence. They talked weather, the county fair, whether the Hendersons were going to get their corn in before the first frost. Then a comfortable silence, the kind between two people who don't need to fill it. He watched her wring out a shirt, arm strong, movement sure, and he thought about what Briggs had said, and what Sandra Morrison had said, and what he'd already admitted to himself on that dark road in July. And then, without planning it, without his better judgment getting a hand on the brake in time, "You know, Clara, whoever ends up marrying you is going to be a very lucky man." He meant it as an honest observation, expected her to laugh it off. Instead, she went still. Hands stayed on the shirt. A small color came up in her face, not dramatic, just a deepening, like a lamp being turned up. She didn't look at him right away. Then she did. "I was hoping it would be you," she said very quietly. The creek kept moving. The cottonwoods kept their sound. A hawk crossed the sky above them, unhurried. Ethan stood on his side of the fence and understood that something had shifted between them that wasn't going back to what it was. He found he didn't want it to. Clara. Then, because he was a man who said what he meant on and off the clock both, I meant what I said. I know you did, she said. That's why I said what I said. A pause. I've been thinking about you since July. The social. Before that, probably. I just didn't know it yet. She looked at the shirt in her hands, set it carefully back in the basket. I've been thinking about you a good deal longer than July. A dry note crept into her voice. That humor of hers, showing up even here. You were considerably slower than I was. For a lawman, that's not much of a track record. He laughed, hadn't expected to. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, she said. You got there. They stood on opposite sides of the fence in the summer sun, and Ethan thought about how strange it was, how a person could be right there, waving him past on the county road every week for years, and how long it could take to actually see them. He felt something he recognized after a second as gratitude. Would you let me come calling on you properly? He said. I'd like to talk to your father. She looked at him a moment, then picked up her basket. He likes you, she said simply. Been wondering when you'd get around to it, about a year now. She walked off toward the house. Ethan stood at that fence a long while after she'd gone, feeling like a man who just narrowly missed the worst mistake of his life. He went the next evening, off duty, in a clean-pressed shirt with the badge left on his dresser at home, more nervous than he'd been at his own oral board for the sheriff's exam. Daniel Harmon was out on the porch when he pulled up, which told Ethan that Clara had already said something. Harmon was a big, quiet man with a gray beard and eyes that took things in without commenting on them right away. He nodded at the empty lawn chair beside him. They sat watching the last of the sunset over the western hills, a transistor radio playing low somewhere behind them. I'd like to come calling on Clara, Ethan said, with your permission. Harmon was quiet a moment. What took you so long? Ethan looked at him. I'm asking sincerely, Harmon said. Ruth and I have been watching you work this out for 2 years. Every time you drove past this house slower than the speed limit required, if I'm honest, started to wonder if we'd need to say something ourselves. I'm slow, Ethan admitted. You're steady, Harmon said, which was a kinder version of the same thing. He looked out at the hills. Clara doesn't ask for things she doesn't need, but she deserves a man who sees her clear, sees what she actually is, not the sheriff's wife, her. I see her, Ethan said quietly. Harmon studied him a long moment, then nodded once. Supper's at 6 most nights, he said. Ruth sets a good table. Ethan had supper with the Harmons 4 times that week. On the 4th evening, he and Clara walked out to the edge of the property and stood in the last daylight, talking about the future, about small things and larger ones, about what it meant to be married to a man who might get a call in the middle of Sunday dinner and have to leave without finishing his plate. You happy out here? He asked. With everything that comes with a life like this? She thought about it honestly. I think happiness is mostly made, she said, not found. People who go looking for it somewhere else usually miss what they already have. She glanced at him. What about you? Being sheriff? Is it what you thought it'd be? I think, he said carefully. I'm getting a lot happier lately. Job hasn't changed much. I have. October came in cold and clear and gold. The courtship moved at the pace of 2 people also running full schedules, his split shifts and county calls, her books and the dairy, which meant it happened in the spaces between. Supper evenings, Sunday afternoon drives out to the reservoir with the cruiser radio turned down low, walks down to the creek and back. He brought her wildflowers off the pasture behind the sheriff's office, not bought, just ones he'd noticed and figured she'd like. She pressed them in an old phone book without making a production of it. She taught him to make her mother's apple pie recipe. He was bad at it. She was patient. He got better. She told him patience wasn't naturally in her, but that he made it easy, the kind of thing she said sideways, not looking at him, that he found himself thinking about for days after. He fixed the sticking gate at the Harmon place on his own time, in uniform because he'd come straight from a shift, tool belt over the duty belt. Daniel mentioned it 2 weeks later with a handshake that said more than the words did. One night in mid-October, something happened he never told her about. He was walking across the field toward the Harmon house for supper. cruiser parked out on the road because he liked the walk. And he stopped. Not because anything was wrong, because something was right, and that scared him worse than any call he'd ever answered. He stood there in the dark, with the porch light of the Harmon house glowing ahead of him, and understood fully what he was walking toward. Not just supper, not just Clara, the wanting itself, the real kind, the kind that could be lost. He'd stopped wanting things directly a long time back because wanting directly meant you could lose directly, and 6 years of wearing a badge in a county that size had taught him plenty about what loss cost. He stood there 10 minutes. Then he walked forward anyway. Clara didn't know he'd stopped. She always heard him coming up the field. "You're late," she said, opening the door. "Biscuits are getting cold." And he stepped into the warmth and the smell of supper and looked at her and thought, this is what I almost didn't let myself have. He asked her in November, at the fence by the creek. He'd thought about somewhere fancier, the overlook above the county, sunset behind him, the whole production. But when the moment actually arrived, it didn't feel right to dress it up. The creek was where they'd first said the true things, seemed right to come back to it. The cottonwoods had gone gold and were starting to let go of their leaves, first real cold of the season in the air. Clara had a jean jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. He had the ring in his jacket pocket, his mother's, a simple silver band with a small stone, carried it 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, before deciding the right moment was one you made yourself. "Clara!" She turned. He stood in front of her and said what he meant, plainly, the way he'd learned she preferred it. "I know I was slow," he said. "Know it took me longer than it should have to see what was right in front of me the whole time, but I see it now. I see you clear every day, and I want to keep seeing you clear every day for the rest of my life. Want to build something with you, whatever that looks like, badge and all." He paused. "I'd very much like it if you'd marry me." She looked at him a long moment, eyes bright, smiling, the kind of smile that's so genuine it's got nowhere to hide. "Ethan Callaway," she said. "Took you long enough. Is that a yes?" "That's absolutely a yes." He put his mother's ring on her finger there by the creek under the gold cottonwoods. She looked at it a moment, not the ring exactly, the life it stood for. Then she looked up at him and he kissed her for the first time, and the creek moved past them the way it always had, indifferent and faithful, and the cottonwoods let go of another leaf or two into the November air. That winter was the best of Ethan's life so far. Not because it was easy. A county sheriff's winter never was, with icy roads and stranded motorists and the occasional call that pulled him out of bed at 2 a.m. But there was supper at the Harmons twice a week now, and drives home through the cold with Clara beside him in the cruiser on his off nights, heater running, and the solid, warm knowledge, like a good fire, that spring was coming. He fixed up the little house behind the sheriff's office that winter, the one the county had let him have cheap since he took the badge. Redid the kitchen properly, put down new flooring in the main room, installed a second window facing east so the morning light would come through where the kitchen table sat. Didn't tell Clara. Just did it, because the house was hers too now, whether she knew it yet or not. When Ruth Harmon heard about the engagement, she cried, the good kind, overwhelmed relief, held Clara's hands, looked at the ring, then at Ethan and said, "I always knew it'd be you." Daniel nodded from across the room in a way that confirmed he had too. Deputy Wilkins heard the next morning down at the office and just said, "Huh, finally." The same word about 4 other people in town used that week, which made Ethan suspect his feelings had been a good deal more visible than he'd realized, uniform or not. In February, Clara came by with her mother to plan where things would go. She stood in the kitchen, saw the new window, the morning light pouring through it, and went quiet a second. "You did this without telling me," she said. "I did." "Why the east window?" "So you'd have good light mornings," he said. She was quiet another moment. Then she crossed the kitchen, took his hand, held it the way you hold something you mean to keep. "Thank you," she said. 3 words, no performance. He understood she wasn't thanking him for the window. She was thanking him for what it meant, that he'd thought of her in the dark of winter before she was even there, and made something ready for her arrival. That's what love looks like when it doesn't announce itself. It just quietly faces east. The wedding was a Saturday in April, when the cottonwoods were coming into leaf, and the hills had gone green, and the sky was the bright, washed blue that follows a week of spring rain. Half of Millhaven turned out, including, Ethan noted with some amusement, at least 3 people he'd once given warnings to instead of tickets. Clara wore a dress her mother had sewn, simple ivory cotton, small embroidery at the collar, nothing trying to be more than it was. She walked up with her father on one arm, her face clear and certain, and Ethan thought, I cannot believe I was slow about this. Pastor Mills kept the ceremony short, the way everyone agreed he was better at. Daniel's voice cracked slightly on, Who gives this woman? Which set off a sympathetic ripple through several rows, and at least 2 of the men present. Ethan said his vows looking straight at Clara. Out of uniform for once, nothing on his chest but a boutonniere. They were for her, not the room. She said hers the same way. Then they were married. The band played, and everybody ate and danced on the grass out behind the fairgrounds until the sun went down and somebody strung the same string lights they'd used at the July social. Deputy Wilkins covered the county that whole night without a single call for backup, which he considered, privately, the finest piece of luck in his career. That night, in the little house with the east window and the new floor, Clara sat at the kitchen table, hair down, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and looked at Ethan across the table with something entirely new in her expression. Settled, permanent. We're going to be very happy here, she said. You know that? I know, he said. I think I've known a while. Slower than I was, she said. But I got there, he said. She smiled. You got there. The years that followed were built out of ordinary days and honest work, and the particular richness of 2 people who choose each other and then keep choosing each other over and over without making a thing of it. Ethan won re-election twice, unopposed the second time, the county having long since stopped imagining anyone else in the job. Clara ran the books for half the businesses on Main Street and organized a co-op lending system among the women of Millhaven, tools, equipment, extra hands during hard seasons, a practical idea she came up with without any awareness that it was also a quiet act of leadership people would still be talking about in the county 20 years on. Their first child came the spring of their 3rd year, a boy they named Daniel, for her father, who arrived with strong lungs and an opinion about everything. Clara said he got that from Ethan. Ethan said he got it from Clara. Truth was probably both. Their daughter came 2 years after that, Margaret for Ethan's mother. Clara's eyes, Ethan's stubbornness, a combination that would serve her well the rest of her life. On a Tuesday evening in the fall of their 5th year, Ethan was down at the creek turnout, off duty, checking the same section of fence the county trucks kept tearing up, when Clara came down with both kids, Daniel running ahead, Margaret toddling behind with tremendous determination and limited speed. Clara saw him, raised a hand, he climbed the fence and went to them. Daniel demanded to be put on his shoulders immediately. Margaret, with the total severity of a 2-year-old, demanded the exact same thing. A negotiation was required. Later, when the kids had worn themselves out and were leaning heavy against them in the last of the light, Clara rested her head on his shoulder. You know what I've been thinking about, she said. That first summer, right here, what you said, whoever marries you'll be a lucky man. You were right, he said. She is very lucky, Clara said. He looked at her. I'm the lucky one, sheriff of the whole county, and the smartest thing I ever did was pull over at a creek turnout on a Tuesday. We're both lucky, she said practically. We're both lucky, he agreed. The cottonwoods had gone gold again. October, reliable as everything else in this county that had become, in every way that mattered, his to look after. The mountains held the last sun on their high peaks. Millhaven kept on being Millhaven, beautiful and indifferent, full of people trying to build lives worth building. And Sheriff Ethan Callaway sat there holding his family in the golden light, understanding with the full weight of a man who knows what things cost, exactly what he'd almost missed, and was grateful down to the bone that he'd gotten there, slower than he should have been, but exactly where he was supposed to be. Ethan wasn't a coward. He was just a man who'd gotten so used to not wanting things directly that he'd stopped noticing when he'd started wanting them again. That's not a weakness unique to him or to men who wear a badge for a living. It's something most of us recognize in ourselves if we're honest about it. And Clara knew for years carried it quietly without bitterness, without ever performing it for anybody. And when the moment finally came, she answered honestly, when she could easily have deflected instead. That took more courage than anything Ethan did at that fence. They both chose the honest thing. And from one moment at a creek turnout in Colorado, in the summer of 1978, everything else followed. The greatest things in this life are rarely hidden. More often than not, they're right there close by, doing the wash by a creek, waiting for a lawman to slow down long enough to finally see them clearly. Don't wait 7 years. Thank you for riding with me today. Wherever you are, I'm grateful you were here. Until next time, keep riding.